Hi, I'm Sander. I'm the creator of the Easy Camera Tracker add-on for Blender, and today I'm going to explain everything there is to know about the add-on, from installation to tracking to compositing. I'm going to tell you about the limitations, about all the new features I've developed, and I'm going to show you exactly how I turned this shot into this shot. So if you're ready, let's begin. So you can buy the add-on on easycameratracker.com, or you can just find it in the Superhive market. After you bought it, you can download the zip file, which you can just drag to your Blender and press OK. Now you can see the add-on is installed and it appears in the sidebar. If it's not visible, press N on your keyboard. So there are a few panels: the main panel, a scene setup, extra options, and a few extra buttons. These buttons are useful after tracking, and some of them don't even work before tracking, like the compositor setup, because it needs the frames that are created during tracking to set up the compositor, so you can't do this yet. So basically these are all for after tracking. You can use these options before tracking, but I'm going to show you later. So to begin, let's select our video, which is this one. Let's select it. You can find information about the file here, like the resolution, the FPS and the duration. And if you want to make sure that you have the right file selected, you can press this button to play it. And this is also useful for trimming later, because this video is straight from my drone, so it's very long, and tracking an entire video like this would take ages, so we need to trim it. So just find a good starting position. This is a nice shot. So let's start at 1 minute 10 and go on to 1 minute 15. You can enter that here. 1:10, 1:15, which will automatically hide the warning. And if you have a short video, you can press this button so that you can enter the seconds. Now here are some important settings to change. The most important is this one. If your shot was filmed using a free moving camera, you select this one. And if the camera only rotates, you select this one. Here is an example of a shot where the camera does not move through space, but it only rotates. So for our drone shot, obviously the camera is moving and rotating. So we're going to choose this option. Now we choose the type of motion in the shot. Because this is a drone shot, the movement is very smooth. But if it's like a very shaky handheld shot, it's smart to use this one, which will increase the tracking time, because it will track all the frames in the video. When choosing the smooth camera move, it will skip frames depending on the amount of frames per second your footage is, and will therefore track a lot quicker. Now if your camera did not zoom in during the shot, you leave this unchecked. But if you have a shot like this, you can see that the focal length changes during the shot. So in that case you do check this option. But make sure you have a shot that doesn't have too much motion blur. For example, here you can see that there's a lot of motion blur, so probably the shot would not be able to track. Here's a different example, and here you can see there is some motion blur, but a lot less. So this shot would be able to track just fine. But our drone shot does not zoom, so we leave this unchecked. Now here's a bit of a technical choice to make, which is to use the main tracker, which uses the photogrammetry tool CallMap to track thousands of points in your shot to recreate the scene and camera movement. It's fully automatic, which is awesome, but if you want more control over your track, or if the main tracker fails, you can use the alternative tracker, which as you can see is still a beta feature, which will use Blender's internal motion tracker and therefore will optically find features to track, which is very fast, but also less precise. And also it does not support zoom shots. So basically in most cases you just want to use the main tracker. If you don't want to see these beta functions, you can go to the preferences and disable it here. Now in most cases the fast tracking setting is just fine, but if you need the best possible track and you're not in a rush, you can use the quality setting, which will track the video at full resolution and all frames. And it also gives you the option to undistort your video, which will create an image sequence where the lens distortion is removed, which is awesome for compositing. If you know what you're doing, you can also use the custom settings and manually change those settings. For information about these settings, you can use the tooltips or check the documentation, which can be found here. But for our drone shot, we're just going to use the fast settings. So let's start tracking. The tracking process will run in the background, so you can still just use Blender. Press OK. Just note that because your computer is working very hard, it might be less responsive. You can see it's tracking the video, and if you want to see exactly what it's doing, you can open the console. So as you can see, it has created an image sequence for tracking, which may have a lower resolution and a lower FPS than the original footage. It then also creates an image sequence for rendering at full resolution and with all frames. Then it starts the tracking process and it will check automatically if you have an NVIDIA video card. If you do, the process of finding and matching features will be a lot quicker. And if you don't, it will use the CPU and it may take a bit longer for the tracking process. Then it solves the camera motion and 3D point cloud. It sets up the scene. It will delete the temporary tracking folders and it will tell you how long it took to track. In my case, less than a minute. So let's just check our Finder, where you can see it has created a folder for our shot with inside a couple of folders. Here are all the frames in original resolution. And here are the frames that are used for tracking. And CallMap also creates a folder with all sorts of tracking data, which is automatically important to the scene. So you don't need to worry about this. After tracking, it also creates this text file where you can see which settings were used for tracking. So it was a free moving shot with fast tracking settings, a smooth motion. These are the settings that were set automatically under the hood. And here you can see that you trimmed from 1 minute 10 to 1 minute 15. Now these two folders are usually deleted automatically unless you have this setting checked, keep tracking folders. Because I have it checked, these folders are not deleted, but I can delete them now. So let's see what we got and press play. So you can see that the 3D camera moves down and a point cloud is created. If you select the point cloud and go to the modifier tab, you can increase the point size. And if you go to the material shading, you can see that they have colors. And I've created a cleanup function, which you can disable to see even more points. The reason for this cleanup is to avoid these floating points, but you can also increase the distance to have it less strict. So this looks good to me. Now you can see the orientation of the scene is all wrong. And for this, there's a scene setup button right here. But to use this button, you need to select 3 verticals in your point cloud that are located on the floor and press F to make a triangle. So let's try that. Go into edit mode. Find a few points on the floor. So maybe this one, and this one. Press F and click this button. So as you can see, now the origin is set a lot better, but it's still not perfect. So now you can just move the empty, which is the parent of the point cloud and the camera, to do a more precise location. So for example, this would be a better origin. So for example, move it on the Y-axis, on the Z-axis, and rotate it on the Z-axis. I can also first make a cube, for example, and scale it to match some of my geometry. Let's hide the point cloud for now. I'm assuming this tower is straight, so this looks good to me. Now let's check the render settings. And you can see it has been set to match the footage. So let's lower that a bit for a test render. But as you can see, the background is not set. So I've created a simple button for this, set up compositor. And now let's re-render again. And you can see that the footage is now visible behind the render. Let's check the compositor real quick. So this is what it's done. It's added the image sequence, added a scale node, which is useful when rendering at lower resolution, and an alpha over node so that the render and the footage is combined to the output. So now you can disable the camera background here, go to rendered view and enable the compositor here to see what that looks like. But there's something weird when zooming in too much, that the background is not zooming with the camera. So I prefer to disable the compositor and just use the camera background because that works better. So let's do some tweaks to the geometry. And we can delete the last 2 vertices. Now let's add a few loop cuts so that we get square faces. Maybe 4. And now let's subdivide this a lot because we're going to use a cloth modifier. Let's add an auto smooth modifier. Now let's first create a floor so that our cloth can fall onto something. Use this button and I'll show you what kind of material is created and scale up the plane. As you can see, the footage is projected onto the plane from the camera view, which is very useful to create realistic bounce light. So you can see the image sequence that is created is automatically set up. The aspect ratio of the footage is set correctly. The camera object is used as a source for the UV projection. And the focal length is set to be a driver, so that the focal length here is set automatically in the material. So for the ground plane, let's disable the specular and check the extra options. because I want to show you a few of these buttons. Let's add a sun and go to the camera view and go to rendered view. Now let's rotate the sun to match our footage and make sure we enable cycles or ray tracing for Eevee. Let's increase the brightness of the sun and maybe also the brightness of the world. Now when using ray tracing in Eevee or cycles, the color of the floor is used as bounce light, but because everything outside of the camera view is black, it will not give any bounce light. So to fix this, you can click the floor and press the extend texture button, which will mirror the texture on both sides, which looks a bit strange, but it helps with the bounce light. So if I change the material of this object to be less rough and more shiny, you can see what enable and disabling the feature does. And as you can see, you don't really see the ends of the floor, which means that we match the lighting of the environment pretty good. But in our case, it's probably better to use the shadow catcher option, which makes the floor transparent, except for the shadows and reflections. So let's render again. Alright, that looks good, but let's compare it to our previous render. And I'm not sure if you can see this with the YouTube compression, but when rendering without shadow catcher, you can see the edge of the floor right here. And when using it as a shadow catcher, it's a lot better. Now for the tower itself, we could just use the same material as for the floor and just don't use the shadow catcher. But because we're going to use a cloth simulation on the tower will move, and as you can see, the material does not stick to the object. So to fix this, just pick a frame that you like, maybe this one, so that the entire tower is in frame. Press stop and use U project from view. Now let's first make a duplicate of the material and call it tower. And now we just replace the image sequence for a single frame, 61, to match with our current frame. And we just delete these nodes to make the UV map the projector. And this is exactly what we want. Now let's hide this panel for now and set up the cloth simulation, which is right here. Enable cloth and go to the first frame and press play. And as you can see, it still goes through the floor. And to fix this, just go to the first frame, select the floor and enable collisions. And now play again. And now you can see that it collides with the floor, but it doesn't collide with itself. So to fix that, go to frame 1, select the tower, scroll down, go to collisions and enable self collisions and press play. That already looks a lot better. But to avoid the bottom from slipping, we'll just select the bottom edge, make a new group, Ctrl Z, and use that group for the shape and the pin group. And now this edge will never move, it's pinned to the ground. You see, that already looks a lot better, I think. But it still needs to collide with the building here. So for that, we just go to the first frame, select the floor and edit it and add a cube and just give it the shape that you like. Maybe add a loop cut here. Now let's also create a wall right here. And when we switch to rendered view, you can see that because the ground is already a shadow catcher, it correctly masks the front of the tower. And because it's already a colliding object, now when we play back the animation, you can see that it collides with the building, but the building pushes the tower a bit back. So let's also add a collider behind the tower. And for this, we're just going to use this object, duplicate it, select all faces and just shrink them with Alt S. Now let's disable the cloth modifier for this object and enable collisions and make sure we don't render this object and maybe also hide it in the viewport. Now you can see that the cloth is also moving away from the tower and not moving inwards. Now you can see that the faces don't look very smooth. This is because the smooth modifier is pinned to the bottom. Let's remove the pin and move it up, which fixes this. And you can also add a subsurface modifier with Ctrl 1 after the cloth modifier to make it even more smooth. Now let's re-enable the shadow catcher and do a test render. So you can see that the shadow is being catched on the building behind it, on the building here, on the building here, and it's colliding properly. So we're doing good, but you can see the tower is still here. So we need to replace it with something else. In my animation, I've created some scaffolding and some building cloth on the backside, basically to hide the tower which is still in the footage behind it. So let's just do that. Now let's unhide our collider. Let's call this collider tower. I call this tower just to keep it clean. Now in the tower collider, go to edit mode and select the outer edges, duplicate it and separate it. Now edit the new object, set the cursor position to this line and extrude this line on the x-axis and scale it on the x-axis to reach the other side. And let's bridge these two edges like this. This object does not need to be a collider, so just press this button, go to the camera view, and you can see if we hide the collider, and we'll call this backdrop, and let's just enable the camera background. You can see that this looks already a lot nicer because it covers up the existing tower. But there's a problem that it covers the roof of the tower. So for that we need a mask. Let's go to the first frame, select our collider again, go to edit mode, select the top edge, separate it from this object, edit that new object and just extrude those edges upwards. Disable collisions for this object and just make it a mask with this button. And that's it. Let's hide our collider object again. Make sure we do render our mask and our backdrop. And our shadow looks a bit strange because now this is only a plane, so the light can come through from here. So to fix that, just make this a bit longer and maybe make it a bit taller. It doesn't matter. So now the shadow looks good. And now we're gonna make a material for this object. Make a new material and call this backdrop. Let's add a checker. So for the backdrop, I thought it would be nice if it looked like these separate pieces of cloth, and I want to have them all in a different color. So for this I use the bricks texture. So let's first create a UV map. Go to the side view and project from view, scale to bounce. And let's add a bricks texture. Connect it here. Make sure you use the UV map. Now let's don't offset every second row and remove the mortar. And to have them, and now just play with the scale, maybe like this. Now just select a couple of nice greens for the two colors. And I think this looks okay. Now let's add some displacement. For this, let's just use a noise texture and connect it to a displacement map. And use the same UV map. And make sure you also enable displacement here, so that it actually pushes out the geometry. Let's shade smooth. Now you can just play with the scale, something that looks nice. And if you switch this to 4D, you can also animate it to simulate wind. To do that, just add a value node and enter hashtag frame. So this changes every frame, which is far too much for this value. So just divide this by maybe 500 and connect it here. Now let's create the scaffolding. Just create a plane, maybe move it so that it's inside the tower like this, and add some rows, maybe like this. Delete the middle vertex and also delete the faces. Now let's extrude this up and triangulate all the side faces and delete all faces. And now let's create an array of this. Upwards. Maybe 14 times. Now to make the geometry, I use some geometry nodes. So just go to the geometry nodes window, click new. And for this we're gonna need some curves. So mesh to curves. And then we're gonna go curve to mesh. And for the profile, we're gonna use a curve circle with a resolution of maybe 8 or something. A very small size. Let's increase the size a bit. Now let's set a material. This one is not used, so let's use this. Call it steel. Increase the metallic, make it a bit darker. Now let's add some planks. And now they're all correct. Now just set a material, call this planks, make it a wood color, create an array with a constant offset on the z-axis, and we don't need planks on the bottom one, so just move it up. So we're moving 1.66 meters, so this should also be 1.66, and we had maybe 14 layers, so what was it? no, less. And let's just decrease this until the top one touches the steel. Now to randomize the colors of the wood, there's a new node which is random per island, and you can use this to mix two different colors and use that for the base color. But somehow this is not working in the viewport, so just enable the rendered view. Let's unhide our other objects. Let's just bake our cloth sim. Go to physics, cache. We only need 125 frames and bake it. And I think this already looks very good. Now just for fun, let's add a rocket, add a UV sphere, scale it on the Z-axis. Let's make this pointy. Let's add a material, increase the metallic look. Let's just add some lights. Place this somewhere. You can use the face snapping for this. Maybe a dark place like this. Alt D to make an instance of it. And now let's add some emission, make it quite bright. I think this looks nice. Now let's have a look at the other features. So we're gonna select the same video as before and trim it. And now let's enable the beta features, which will allow us to also track rotating shots and use Blender's internal motion tracker to solve this shot. So let's just give this a go, because this is a free moving shot and it's a drone shot, so it's smooth. Let's use quality settings for the best result, because using Blender's internal motion tracker is already quite quick. You can also use custom settings, but I'm not going to cover that in this video. If you used auto exposure in your video and the brightness of your video changes during the shot, you need to enable this. In other cases, just leave it like this. Let's just start tracking. Just a reminder, it's a beta feature, so it may have some issues. So you can see it's already done, but we need to check the console. As you can see, there's a warning. There were some issues with the track, but we can just see how it looks. And to my eyes, this is a very clean track. The points are not moving at all. And it did this in 8 seconds. So in some cases, using the Blender's internal motion tracker like this is a great alternative. There's still a feature I didn't mention in the settings, which is this one, show motion tracking window after tracking. I advise you to enable this so that after tracking, let's just undo everything, so that after tracking the shot, the motion tracking window is open and you can make some changes if you like. So you can see all the tracks that it found. You can see that the solve error is less than 1 pixels. So for a 4K video, that's extremely good. If you want, you can make some changes, like delete tracks that you don't think are good and just click solve camera motion again. So now we can just close those windows. And we still need to orient our scene. So for this, again, just select some points that are on the floor and press F to make a face. Go to scene setup, set camera orientation. And now you can see the grid is on the floor. And now we can just move the empty so that the world origin is at a better place, and maybe rotate on the Z-axis. We can also add the horizon and check that the horizon is good. You can see the vertical axis does not line up with the church and the horizon is all wonky. So possibly these points don't have the exact same height. We can just fix that by selecting the empty and rotating on the X-axis in this case. And now you can see the Z-axis matches our footage perfectly, and you can see the grid matches our church in this case perfectly. So that's the alternative motion tracker. Now let's also try a rotating shot. So just go for a clean slate and select a tripod shot. So this is the shot. So a shot like this can only be tracked using Blender's internal motion tracker, because the main tracker is a photogrammetry tracker and relies on a moving camera to calculate depth information and rotation. So if we change our camera move to only rotate, you can see that it switches automatically to Blender's internal motion tracker. Now again, this is a handheld shot, but not very shaky, so let's choose regular. Let's go for a high quality track. The brightness in the video does not change, so we can just start tracking. So it's tracking 225 frames in 6 seconds. Let's just see the result. I think that looks already quite good. So the error solve is less than 2 pixels, which for a 4K video is just fine. So the advantage of using Blender's internal motion tracker is that you can edit the track afterwards, which is not possible using this tracker. So let's just close these windows. And if you don't want to see the motion tracking windows, just disable this in the add-on settings. Now let's go to a frame where we can see the horizon and rotate the empty to match the horizon with our footage. So I think this is already quite good. So we can move the empty to a location so that the world has its origin at a logical place. Let's change the pivot point to the 3D cursor and rotate on the Z-axis. So I think that's it. This is how you track a rotating shot. Now if you just want to add some text, for example, to the animation, you can just do text like this. And now let's lower the resolution and do a test render. And if you just quickly want to add the video to the background, you can use this button. Let's turn off the camera background and enable the scene world. So now when we render, you can see that the footage is on the background. This is the quickest way to add the video to the background and render it together. However, when you rotate your view, you can see that the background stays visible like this. So you can either just disable it in your viewport, or instead you can use the skybox, which creates an icosphere with the video projected onto it, which can be useful if you want to see the video in your background. And I think we discussed all the settings we need. Now if for some reason you need to convert a video to an image sequence but don't need to track, you can use this option, which will disable the tracking settings, and you can just use these settings to scale your footage and to change the frames per second. For example, if you have 60 frames per second footage and you only want 30 frames per second, you can change this to 30. And when I press this button, it will convert the video. And when it's done, you can find the frames right here. This is the folder that's created when tracking a shot. And this is the folder that's created when just converting a video to frames. So I hope you liked this video. I know it's quite long, but I thought it was good to include everything there is to know about this add-on. You can read some more information in the documentation. Have a lovely day.